Part 320. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3199. After Zhou Man received the first edict, she began to prepare to return to Beijing. She first packed the things that everyone needed to bring back, and then packed her own luggage. She also planned to take some souvenirs for her home. As a result, before she could pack up, the second edict arrived in Bihai County. Zhou Man looked at the decree, and quickly closed the decree and ran to Baishan. It seems that something happened in Beijing. Your Majesty ordered me to return to Beijing in a hurry. I'll leave tomorrow. The light car is simple and convenient, and the luggage that I have packed at home. Baishan, you go first, I'll have someone send it back later. Zhou Man originally wanted to say that he would not bring it. Isn't it troublesome? Baishan said, it's all cleaned up, it's a pity not to bring it. He said, it's fine to have the guards escort some things back to Beijing. They can also bring some more things when you come back. Thursday Lang ran over and heard the words, no, I'll take those things back. He said, we also have to go back to Beijing. When the time comes, I will take all these things with me. When we come back, I will not be afraid. I will bring you what the family brings to you. Now is the time when you need manpower, and this time it costs a lot, so leave it all to me. When Zhou Man heard it, he immediately nodded, okay, I'll leave it to you. Baishan took her hand and went back to the backyard. Bring Daji and Zibing with you. Even if you have to go back to Beijing quickly, don't feel too wronged on the way. Zhou Man nodded again and again, indicating that he had written it down. Early the next morning, Zhou Man brought the big cakes and 2 teams of guards who came to declare the decree and quickly returned to Beijing. In just 6 days, they rushed back to the capital from Qingzhou. As soon as he entered the city gate, Zhou Man looked left and right, and found that no one was waiting for him at the city gate, so he felt relieved and said to the guards, I will go back to the house to wash up first, and then I will enter the palace to face the saints later. It was not a matter of military intelligence, and officials did not need to enter the palace immediately when they returned to Beijing, so the guards nodded and dispersed at the gate of the city. Zhou Man ran back home, and before he had time to chat with his family, Mr. Zhuang called him to the study to talk. 2 things, Mr. Wei is seriously ill, and your Majesty is sad. He fell ill from heat stroke some time ago, and now his health is a little bad. The second is the matter of the new rice seeds. Your Majesty has ordered Li Zhong to come to Beijing. The sky should have arrived, and now the rice in Pu village has been harvested, and the data can be reported in the courtroom. Mr. Zhuang stretched out his hand and took out a few sheets of paper full of words from the desk to her, and said, this records the characteristics and yields of rice seeds in various places. If you need to memorize them, your Majesty will definitely ask you what those seeds are. Where did it come from? Zhou Man took it, glanced at it, and said with a smile, don't worry, sir, I know all these rice seeds. 2 years ago, Baishan entrusted some Bai family caravans and stewards to collect rice seeds from various places. I have seen them all. The rice seeds for DRD were selected from these various rice seeds. In fact, she did not lie. She really found the first generation rice seeds. Seeing what she knew, Mr. Zhuang nodded, and said, your Majesty is still waiting for you in the palace, you should go wash up and enter the palace. Zhou Man should go. Zhou Man found out his crimson official uniform and put it on, and entered the palace with a refreshing look. As a result, as soon as she entered the palace gate, the prince hurried out of the Taiji palace with someone, and when he saw her, he waved, you didn't meet you. The servant of the family's decree. Zhou Man, I just finished taking a shower and entered the imperial city by car for the sake of cleanliness. That's mostly mist. The prince said, then you should leave the palace with Gu. Your Majesty has an order for you to go directly to Wei's house to diagnose and treat Lord Wei. At this time, Xiao Yuanzheng is also there. Zhou Man turned around and went out of the palace with the prince. Your Highness, is Lord Wei seriously ill? The prince said, it's not light, this is the second time Gu has been ordered to visit Lord Wei in the Wei mansion. Zhou Man went out of the palace in a worried manner. The prince got into the car first. Seeing that she was still looking around in a daze, he said, come up and ride together. Zhou Man stepped on the stool and got into the car, and when the carriage started to move, the prince lifted his eyelids to look at Zhou Man up and down. It seems that he has improved a lot than before. I wonder if his medical skills have improved. Zhou Man thought for a while and said, I should have grown up, I have been studying medicine. The prince was very curious, study? From whom? Zhou Man paused and said, books and patients. Every time you see a patient, you can accumulate a little experience. When you have enough experience, you can continue to study and your medical skills will improve. Prince, then you should study Mr. Wei carefully this time to see if you can save him. Zhou Man sighed worriedly, I'll try my best. Although she is not in the capital, she has always communicated with Imperial Dr. Lu of Xiao Yuanzheng. Except for the physical condition of the emperor and the prince, which cannot be leaked at will, other patients who were mainly diagnosed and treated by Zhou Man before, such as Wei Ji, such as the queen, both of them will write letters. To communicate with her is to better prescribe and choose treatment methods. As early as half a year ago, Xiao Yuanzheng wrote to her, saying that Mr. Wei was at the end of the fight, but he kept holding on because he was worried about the Jiangnan salt field. Now that half a year has passed, I am afraid that my physical condition will get worse. The carriage stopped at the Wei mansion, and the people from the Wei mansion who had received the news in advance greeted the prince at the door. Mrs. Wei was about to bring people a salute, but saw Zhou Man who got off the car first. Her eyes widened slightly, and she said in surprise, Master Zhou, have you returned to Beijing? Zhou Man smiled at Mrs. Wei, glanced at Princess Changyu behind her, and then turned sideways to let the prince get off the car. The crowd was busy saluting. The prince raised his hand and said, don't be too polite. Your Majesty is concerned about Lord Wei's condition and has specially ordered to visit Lord Wei alone. Seeing Madame Wei's anxious face, the prince knew what she was anxious about, so he turned his head and said to Zhou Man, go in and see Lord Wei. Zhou Man nodded, and they stepped into the Wei mansion first, and went directly to the main courtyard. The main courtyard was filled with the smell of medicine. Xiao Yuanzheng and Imperial Physician Lu were sitting in a daze. Oh, no, maybe they were thinking. Hearing the movement, he raised his head and saw Zhou Man was first surprised, then overjoyed. Master Zhou is back. The two of them stepped forward one by one, pinched her, and walked to the hospital bed. Xiao Yuan lowered his voice and said, Master Wei has been asleep since noon yesterday, and there is no sign of waking up until now. I think it is bad luck. Not enough. Imperial Physician Lu said, I and Xiao Yuan have been watching it, and it is already like the lamp is exhausted. You can see if there is any better way. Zhou Man went to feel the pulse of Lord Wei, looked at his face and the prescription he took recently, sighed and looked back at the Wei family, and asked, what is your appeal? When Mrs. Wei heard this, she felt sad and asked, what do you mean? We naturally hope that the master will be healthy. Zhou Man shook his head and said, Master Wei is already exhausted. We are at a loss for what to do. It's beyond my expectations that he can persist until now. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3200. When Mrs. Wei heard this, she couldn't help but wipe away her tears. She had already prepared for this, but she couldn't help but feel sad at this time. Fortunately, she turned around quickly and said after thinking about it, I only hope that the three imperial physicians can make him feel more comfortable and not be too painful. The two children are already on their way back, and they should be able to arrive in Beijing in 5 days. Zhou Man understood and looked at Xiao Yuanzheng and Imperial Physician Lu. The two pondered, pulling Zhou Man aside and whispering, "Don't accept it casually, 5 days, I can't promise them even 5 hours now." Zhou Man said in a low voice, "Actually, there is a way. Now the injection will make him fall asleep, reducing the burden on the internal organs, and then prescribing the prescription to hold that breath. 5 days is fine." Xiao Yuanzheng pondered, sleeping can also reduce the pain of Lord Wei, but... He hesitated, can the Wei family and His Majesty agree? Zhou Man pouted towards the other side and whispered, "Go and ask." Imperial Physician Lu also motioned to Xiao Yuanzheng, "Go and ask." Xiao Yuanzheng. Before Zhou Man came back, Imperial Physician Lu was not like this. But in the end, Xiao Yuanzheng went to ask. The matter was so important that the Wei family could not make decisions on their own, so the prince had to take Wei Yu back to the palace to ask the emperor. The emperor frowned and asked the prince, "Is there nothing Zhou Man can do?" The prince said, "Xiao Yuanzheng and the three of them all said that Lord Wei is overworked and exhausted." The emperor sighed quietly, "If I hadn't brought him out of Beijing." Wei Yu hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, even if there is no trip to Pu village, my father's body will not be able to support it for long. These days of his illness, a day's visit to Pu village should be his harvest in 10 years. Although he still doesn't know what is in Pu village, but since his father said so, obviously he has no regrets." The emperor let out a sigh, and nodded after a while, "Since this is what Madame Wei intended, let's do what Madame Wei intended." He was silent for a long time, suppressed the sadness in his heart, and sighed, "Before Mr. Wei woke up, he sent someone into the palace to tell me that I want to send him off myself, and I want to tell him something." Wei Yu bowed in response. With the emperor's permission, Zhou Man and Xiao Yuanzheng began to prepare needles. The family members and servants were all sent out, and there were only 2 medical assistants in the room besides 3 people. Imperial Physician Lu and Xiao Yuanzheng took off Lord Wei's clothes, and Zhou Man prepared the needles he needed, so he and Xiao Yuanzheng used the needles together. This time, there are a lot of needle movements, so 2 people are needed. Fortunately, they have tried it on the puppet several times before, and they cooperated fairly well. This set of acupuncture is a treasured acupuncture method in the Taiyuan Hospital. Zhou Man has been in the Taiyuan Hospital for 3 years, and Xiao Yuanzheng is willing to share it with her. After the 2 people finished the needles, their foreheads were sweating. Because of the high concentration for a long time, they were a little sluggish at the moment, and their faces were a little pale. Xiao Yuan was sitting on a chair and staring at the needle on Mr. Wei's body. "When I'm old, if I were alone, I wouldn't dare to use this acupuncture method." Zhou Man also sat on the chair to take a breath. "Isn't there still Imperial Physician Lu?" Imperial Physician Lu shook his head hurriedly, "I can't do it. I have practiced this acupuncture on a puppet in private. If it doesn't work, there will always be mistakes in the middle." Xiao Yuanzheng also said, "Now in the entire Taiyuan Hospital, you and I are the only ones who can use this acupuncture technique." Zhou Mandao said, "Dr. Zheng is young, and Imperial Physician Lu is not very old, so let them learn it too." Xiao Yuanzheng didn't answer her, but stared at the needle on Wei Ji's body and continued to look at it, then changed the subject and said, "You said that the ginseng added to the prescription for Master Wei should cost $1 or a half. Zhou Man, I don't know the year, what is the effect?" Xiao Yuanzheng, "Your Majesty's reward is 100-year-old ginseng, but it has been used almost before, and the remaining part is not very good." Zhou Man, "Then it's half $1. Maybe the Wei family still has good medicinal materials." Xiao Yuanzheng turned his head and ordered a medical assistant, "Go and ask." The medical assistant got up and said yes. Zhou Man calculated the time and got up first. "Let's go, take the needle, the time is up." The 2 slowly took the needles in order. Imperial Physician Lu and the medical assistant dressed him, Xiao Yuan was watching with folded arms, looking at Zhou Man. You have to be guarded for a few days, come on. Zhou Man, Xiao Yuan Zheng, it's not that I'm lazy, it's that I just returned to the capital, and up to now, I haven't even eaten a hot meal. Xiao Yuan Zheng sighed and said, Master Wei and I have been guarding the imperial physician Lu for the past few days. There are still various things to be dealt with in the imperial physician's office, and your majesty's health is not very good. Lord Zhou, look at what I see in my eyes. Scion, is it as green as leaves? When imperial physician Lu saw her, he immediately said, I don't know how to do this acupuncture. If there is a mistake in the middle, I can't fix it. Zhou Man, okay, I'll come. Xiao Yuan Zheng felt that the burden on his body was much lighter. Since Zhou Man was released, he hadn't felt this way for a long time. Xiao Yuan Zheng couldn't help asking Zhou Man in a low voice, do you want to be transferred back to the capital? Zhou Man was taken aback, Xiao Yuan Zheng, the Qingzhou medical office has not been completed yet, and the path of the local medical office has not yet come out. Seeing how scared you are, don't worry, I'm just asking, I won't force you to separate from Master Bai. Zhou Man's face turned slightly red, and he forced himself to explain to himself, it's not because of Lord Bai, but because of my daughter. She is the cutest time now. I can't bear to be separated from her for too long. Xiao Yuan Zheng glanced at her, you can take her back to the capital. Zhou Man said solemnly, Master Bai is also reluctant to part with his daughter, and he should not do to others what he wants to do to others. How can I deprive him of his family happiness? Xiao Yuan Zheng turned around and ignored her, picked up the prescription on the table and read it for a while, and when the medical assistant who went out to ask questions came in, he asked, how, do you have any good ginseng tablets? Yes, the medical assistant bowed his head and replied, Princess Changjiao sent someone back to the princess mansion to fetch it. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince heard that ginseng was needed for medicine, so he also sent someone back to the East Palace to fetch it. Xiao Yuan Zheng was relieved. He ordered the prescription and said, then spend a penny, Lord Zhou, you can pay more attention to it, and you can give him ginseng tablets every day. Zhou Man nodded in response, and had no objection to the prescriptions prescribed by Imperial Physician Lu and Xiao Yuan Zheng. The three felt Wei Ji's pulse, and after confirming that his condition had calmed down, they recorded it on the record, and signed their signatures. Only then did the Wei family come in to see Wei Ji. Wei Ji's brows loosened a little, but they were still wrinkled, and his breathing was barely visible. If it wasn't for the long-lasting ups and downs in his chest, they would have almost thought they were out of breath. Xiao Yuan Zheng has already explained to the Wei family, and Zhou Man will be left to take care of Wei Ji for the next few days. When Mrs. Wei heard this, she hurriedly asked people to clean up the guest room for Zhou Man to rest. After seeing off the Prince Xiao Yuan Zheng and others, and greeting the Wei family, Zhou Man twisted his neck and went back to the guest room. Chang Yu brought a palace maid over with some food and said, you're hungry, I have someone prepare some food for you. You can eat it first, and I'll make it for you later. I will update 2 chapters today, and another chapter will be added tomorrow. See you tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3201. Zhou Man sat on the edge of the couch and beckoned to her, Mingda and I brought you something back, but it will take a few days to get to the capital. Then you can go to my house to get it. Chang Yu walked over and sat beside her, sighing and nodding, okay. Zhou Man stretched out his hand to hold her hand, don't be too sad, do you want to preside over the Wei residence? Chang Yu nodded, mother-in-law and concubine are both sad, and now I am in charge. She sighed and said, actually, everyone in the family is already mentally prepared, and I'm not going to lie to you. You said earlier that father-in-law was not in good health, and it was already at the end of the fight. At that time, the family started to prepare, but after 3 years, I think it might be longer, but he fell ill a year ago, and it has been more than half a year now. His health is good and bad, he can handle official business when it is good, and he can't even get out of bed when it is bad, so what should be done at home, all preparations are made. But I'm prepared, but I still can't accept it in my heart. Chang Yu felt that he was fine. Although he was a little sad, he could already accept it, but Wei Yu and Mrs. Wei obviously couldn't. Chang Yu held Zhou Man's hand tightly, stared at her and asked, "Man Bao, is his illness really cured?" Zhou Man analyzed the effect of the medicinal liquid on Wei Ji's pulse, and then shook his head. "Our doctor has diseases that can be cured, but there are also diseases that cannot be cured. Lord Wei is the one that cannot be cured now, let alone us. Is an immortal, I'm afraid I won't be able to save it." She said, 3 years ago, if Lord Wei would listen to me, put aside his business affairs, and could relax and take care of his body, he might have been delayed for 5, 6, 7, or 8 years, but he has been busy with state affairs for the past 3 years and exhausted his energy. The loss is huge. Even if I have the art of returning to the sky, I can't save it. Chang Yu was silent for a while. "I will have to work with you in the next few days. You have just returned to Beijing, and you must be tired. You should rest now. By the way, do you want to send someone back to your house to fetch some things? I'm afraid you won't need it. If you are used to the things here, or if you are lacking, tell me, and I will let someone open a warehouse for you to add." Zhou Man was amazed. "Oh my God, Chang Yu, you are so thoughtful. Chang Yu, I've become a mother. Then you can help me get the cake, she knows what to bring." Chang Yu responded and sent someone to call Zibing in Zhou's house. Mr. Wei can't be separated from anyone here, and Zhou Man has to take time to enter the palace to answer, so he can't go home basically. So although Zhou Man has gone home, the Zhou family has not seen Zhou Man. On the 4th day of Wei's Hixingjian, the other 2 sons of the Wei family arrived with their wives and children. At the same time, Zhou Lizhong also went to Beijing. As soon as he entered Beijing, he was taken to the palace, and he never returned home. He stood nervously in front of the Taiji Hall, stroked his sleeves, trying to smooth out the wrinkles. It's just that he has been on the road for the past few days, and he has been wearing this clothes for 3 days. Zhou Lizhong felt a little regretful in his heart. After entering Beijing, he should have asked to go home to wash up and change his clothes. He remembered that when his aunt came back from a business trip, as long as it was not an urgent errand, she would wash up before entering the palace. Zhou Lizhong was bowing his head in remorse when he suddenly heard a chamberlain remind him in a low voice, "Master Zhou is here." Zhou Lizhong immediately turned his head and looked down, and saw in the distance, the little aunt was walking up the steps with her official robe, and the sun shone on her, making her whole body glow, and even the sun was broken into pieces. Zhou Man walked up the steps, and as soon as he looked up, he saw Zhou Lizhong, who was waiting at the door. He smiled and asked, "When did you enter Beijing?" Zhou Li was very secure in his heart, exhaled and said, "An hour ago. I was brought into the palace as soon as I entered Beijing." Zhou Lizhong had never entered the palace, so he was so nervous from start to finish that he couldn't notice the passage of time. Zhou Man nodded and said to the servant, "Please also report to your majesty that we are here." After the waiter came in, he hurried in to report. After a while, Gu Zhong came out in person, bowed and smiled and said, "Master Zhou, your majesty invites the 2 of you in." Zhou Man followed Zhou Lizhong and asked Gu Zhong in a low voice, "Are there many people in the room?" Gu Zhong also lowered his voice, "Everyone is here." Zhou Man knew what he had in mind, and he turned back and said to Zhou Li, "I will answer whatever your majesty asks in a while, listen more and talk less." Zhou Lizhong, "Yes." The emperor is holding a small court meeting, so the important ministers in the court are all there, and the discussion has just come to an end. Zhou Man let Zhou Lizhong to meet the emperor. The emperor waved his hand and said, "Be flat. You are Zhou Lizhong? Raise your head and let me take a look." He looked at Zhou Lizhong carefully. Although he was a little dark, he was very energetic. His face was angular and handsome. He looked at Zhou Lizhong, then turned his head to look aside and couldn't help but raised his head to look at Zhou Man, who looked at him curiously, and couldn't help laughing. "There are still similarities between your aunts and nephews, I heard people say. Did your ancestors have very good-looking people?" Zhou Man thought for a while and said, "My great-grandmother and grandmother." The emperor waved his hand and didn't care much about it, but he still liked good-looking people, so he urged Zhou Lizhong, "With your appearance, you can study and study. As long as you can pass the Mingjing test, you will have a bright future in the future." Seeing the emperor's upright face control, Lord Tang couldn't help coughing heavily. Zhou Man saw Zhou Lizhong's embarrassment on his face flushed red and he didn't know what to say, so he said on his behalf, "Your Majesty, he has no intention of taking the imperial examination, so don't embarrass him. Although reading is good, other professions are not bad. 360 lines of work, you can become a champion, and if you cultivate the land well, can you also contribute to the country and the people?" The emperor lowered his eyes and thought, 360 lines to make the champion? These words are quite new. Didn't you say that? Which book did she read that? Zhou Man swallowed his saliva and hurriedly changed the subject. "Your Majesty summoned us for the new rice seed." "Yes," the emperor returned to his senses, nodded and said, "This matter is very important. I heard Zhuang Shaofu say that the Zhou family has recorded test data." Zhou Li nodded again and again, took out 2 booklets from his sleeves, 2 more from his waist, and 2 more from his boots. "Zhou Man. Emperor and Ministers." Zhou Lizhong held the 6 books he took out above his head and offered them. Gu Zhong was stunned for a moment, then stepped forward to take it and presented it to the emperor. Zhou Man couldn't hold back, and whispered to Zhou Lizhong, "Why are you stuffed in your boots?" Everyone pricked up their ears. Zhou Lizhong whispered, "They said that you can't bring foreign objects into the palace, so I had to carry it on my body." Everyone, is it not a foreign object to carry on the body? The emperor twitched his forehead and began to open the booklet. After a while, he asked, "Which one is the latest?" Zhou Lizhong hurriedly replied, "The one marked with the number 8. The emperor pulled it out and asked, "There are only 6 copies here, why is the number 8 marked?" "Because there are 2 more that I didn't bring." "Is it because I can't figure it out?" The emperor slandered, but did not ask. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3202. The emperor opened the latest volume and raised his eyebrows. "Is this year's data?" "Yes, this is his own record." Zhou Lizhong was not so nervous, and replied, "It's not complete, because when I received the imperial edict, some rice in the village was confiscated and not dried, so the data has only been posted. It's not accurate enough." The emperor went forward and turned the booklet, which recorded in great detail, which day was fertilized, which day was weeded, and what was the state of the rice at that time. The emperor closed the booklet and pulled out the booklet that Bai Shan had delivered 2 days ago. He handed it over to Gu Zhong. "Just read it." Gu Zhong first started Bai Shan's book, and all the rice in Guantian's Guangxi in Bihai County was also collected. Because new rice seeds are all planted in the Guantian, various data are gathered very quickly. To sum up, the yield per mu of Guanation's Guangxi in Bihai County is only 4 stone 8, but the highest per mu yield is 7 stone 5, and the lowest is 3 stone. Bai Shan listed the reasons, saying that most of the official fields here are wasteland left over from the past, so the soil is not fertile enough, and this is the result. He feels that after 2 more years of cultivation, the yield will be higher and higher, and finally reach a relatively stable value. In Lujiang County, Zhou Lizhong's statistics were higher. The average yield per mu was 6.2, the highest was 7.3, and the lowest was 5.6. The whole hall was shocked, even old Master Tang, who had already heard some rumors, were surprised, let alone others. The hall couldn't help but chatter. The emperor ordered the table, everyone gradually quieted down, and one person came out of the queue. Your Majesty, even if the seeds are improved and the yield has increased, it is impossible to increase so much at once, right? The emperor asked Gu Zhong to hand out the booklet recorded by Zhou Lizhong, saying, "This is not a year's work. Besides, I have seen with my own eyes that the ears of rice are indeed long and full." The emperor nodded to Gu Zhong. Gu Zhong turned around, and after a while brought up a wooden box, opened it, and inside was a bunch of rice ears. The emperor smiled and said, "This is the yield of one rice plant, although I specially selected it. One is better than most, but it also deduces how powerful this new rice seed is." When the ministers saw the bunch of rice ears in Gu Zhong's hand, the first thing they thought was that the millet was stained by some method. Even old Master Tang couldn't help but say, "Your Majesty, can you please check it?" The emperor waved his hand generously, "Check it?" So everyone gathered around. Elder Tang took a closer look and then stretched out his hand to squeeze a grain of millet. He took a closer look at the fracture, and after confirming that it was true, he couldn't help but greedily pulled other grains. When everyone stopped, the bunch of rice ears had already been torn off more than half of the millet, and a thick layer was laid directly on the bottom of the box. Emperor! He finally held back his distress. Forget it, let him go back to Pu village again. The Zhou family picked a lot of seeds to leave behind. Those rice ears may not be threshed yet, so they will collect some for collection. After everyone was sure that the bunch of rice ears were real, they stood back to their positions. Although they were shocked and felt that the sky was about to change, they still habitually asked questions. Listen to what Zhou Gongzi means. The Zhou family is I started experimenting with rice seeds 6 years ago, and dare to ask Zhou Gongzi, why did you think about experimenting with rice seeds? Zhou Man couldn't stop it, and Zhou Lizhong had already said, my sister-in-law asked us to test it. Everyone turned to look at Zhou Man. Zhou Man can only say truthfully, Your Majesty, the new wheat seeds in the early years were planted by our family by chance. After that time, the wheat seeds in the world were renewed and the yield of wheat increased. The yield of rice is even higher than that of wheat, so the minister thought, if the rice seeds can be improved as well as the wheat seeds, and the yield can be doubled or even more, wouldn't all the people in the world be able to have enough to eat? The emperor nodded. Zhou Mandao, at that time, there was the help of Lord Bai, concubine Bai, and Yanzianzi, so the minister began to split a few fields in the field to be used as a test field. The emperor nodded approvingly. 2 days ago, Zhou Man entered the palace to face the saint. The two rulers and ministers had already discussed this issue in depth. At that time, Zhou Mank was much more candid, and she told the emperor directly, in addition to wanting to plant new rice seeds. In addition to benefiting all people in the world, I also want to give my nephew a future. She said, our family used to be poor, and they couldn't keep reading. Now it's more difficult to make a career. If you're good at it, apart from all walks of life, what they're best at is farming. Especially my eldest brother and nephew, so I let them farm the land. The emperor asked at the time, then you have never thought about the consequences of not being able to plant new rice seeds? What if they can't grow new rice seeds for more than 10 years, or even 20 years? Zhou Mandao, we don't just do this. In addition to experimenting with new rice seeds, we also experiment with new farming methods and improved agricultural tools. I believe that as long as we study hard, there will always be harvests. Even if new rice seeds cannot be planted, as long as the rice yield can be improved, our hard work will not be in vain. Of course, in the main hall, Zhou Man would not say that it was for the future of the nephews, she emphasized, the minister's family is deeply favored by the emperor, and they dare not forget it every day, so even if they know that the opportunity is small, the minister's family is willing to spend time to try. What if it succeeds? Looking at it today, the heavens really have mercy, and it is also because of His Majesty's lofty virtues that it succeeded at once. Although the emperor knew that she was flattering, he was still too happy to close his mouth. The ministers looked at Zhou Man silently, especially old Master Tang. His face twitched. If she hadn't really planted new rice seeds, and the yield of the new rice seeds was too amazing, she was impeached on the spot for a slanderous charge. The emperor was very comfortable. After flipping through Zhou Lizhong's booklet, he was more confident in the new rice seeds. In addition, the data of Lujian County and Bihai County were here, so he directly ordered, Lu Qing, let someone go to Zhou's house to buy grain and seeds, select a plot of land to cultivate in various places next year, and test the planting conditions of seeds in various places. Sinong Temple cooperates with the household department to complete this matter. Zhao Saiking and Lu Shangshu came out together. Zhou Lizhong has the ability to farm, and my court recruits talents without sticking to one pattern. Besides, he is also a county official in Lujiang. Seeing Zhou Lizhong in a daze, Zhou Man reminded in a low voice, why don't you kneel down and thank you? Zhou Li regained his senses and immediately knelt down, I thank your majesty Long En. The emperor woke him up, remembered Wei Ji, sighed and asked Zhou Man, how is Sir Wei's body? Zhou Man lowered his head, not very good. The emperor said, I will go to see Lord Wei tomorrow. Zhou Man understood that Mr. Wei was about to wake up, a sadness rose in her heart, and she lowered her head to respond. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3203. The emperor took the prince to visit Wei Ji, and Zhou Man and the others knew about it early in the morning, so they started acupuncture early in the morning. Mr. Wei woke up faintly, and it took a while to regain his senses. He opened his mouth to speak, but found that his throat was a little dry. Wei Yu was busy feeding him water. Master Wei's eyes swept over his wife and children behind him, and he felt relieved. He turned to look at Zhou Man, and said with a slight smile, there are Master Zhou and Xiao Yuanzheng. Xiao Yuanzheng said, this is what I should do. He swept the room and sighed, Master Wei, take a good rest, don't get emotional, we're just outside, you can call us if you need anything. Zhou Man also nodded, and went out with Xiao Yuanzheng after salute. As soon as the two of them came out, the other servants in the room also withdrew, leaving only the Wei family in the room. Mrs. Wei poured another glass of water for Wei Ji, and asked with concern, what do you want to eat, sir? I'll let the kitchen do it. Lord Wei smiled slightly and said, no hurry, I'm not hungry yet, let's talk first. Zhou Man and Xiao Yuan were walking a little further, and stopped when they were some distance away from the house. Because the emperor and the prince were coming, the servants of the Wei family were busy scrubbing everywhere. The two of them stood in the yard, surrounded by people coming and going, which made them very conspicuous. As soon as Lord Wei leaves, the DPRK and China will undergo great changes. Zhou Man also frowned and asked, who do you think is the successor? Xiao Yuan is shaking his head. Zhou Man, you are the order of the Imperial Physician's office. At any rate, you are the chief of the first department. As for the third grade, there is no news at all. Xiao Yuanzheng said, I'm still your Shangguan. If I hadn't been in the hall yesterday, I wouldn't have known that you quietly did such a big thing. Zhou Man, it wasn't me who did it, it was my nephew who did it. I know at best. Xiao Yuanzheng just snorted, everyone is not a fool, of course, it can be seen that it is Zhou Man, or Zhou Man and Bai Shan, who are cultivating new rice seeds, and the Zhou family just obeys and works. However, Zhou Man should put the merits on his nephew, and everyone will not object. Xiao Yuanzheng was just a little pity, for such a big credit, if you or Bai Shan came to take it, it would be possible to make him a marquis, but it's just that your nephew came to take it, it's a little worse. The reward is also based on the ability of the person, and Zhou Lizhong obviously cannot afford the reward of Feng Hao. Zhou Man was very satisfied. She said, "Our family is already very satisfied with being promoted from a small official to the leader of the 6th grade temple. Other small officials will never be promoted in their entire lives, so he is only 6 grades. What is there to be dissatisfied with?" Xiao Yuanzheng shook his head. "I don't know much, but I followed a few adults after the court yesterday. They said that if you take the credit, you will be named a princess. This is a great contribution to the future. Zhou Man, it's okay, the county owner is enough for me. The title is not a real job, and it has no real power." She is not very interested in this now. She was more interested in, "Yuanzheng, can I visit the pharmacy after a while?" "What, do you have a new prescription for the pharmacy?" "Don't think about it, I just want to see how the pharmacy of our Imperial Medical Office is like, how much medicine is made every day, and whether it makes money." Xiao Yuanzheng can't hear the word money now, especially the word money that popped out of Zhou Man's mouth, which made him always feel that she was urging him to give money. In the past 2 years, Zhou Manchu has applied for the most public funds from the Hitai Medical Office. Xiao Yuanzheng hurriedly responded with a yes and said, "You stay here, I'll go out to see if anyone has come to the palace." Zhou Man looked at the time, pulled him and said, "What's the hurry, Your Majesty is considerate and will definitely leave enough time for Mr. Wei's family. I guess it won't come until around noon. Let's talk." "Xiao Yuanzheng, I don't want to talk to you." Zhou Man guessed well. It was almost noon when the emperor and the prince arrived. Wei Ji had been with his family all morning, and he even got out of bed and walked around in good spirits. Mrs. Wei felt that he was about to recover. She pulled Zhou Man and Xiao Yuanzheng over to check it out, and made sure that no miracle happened, so she went to the gate with red eyes and waited to welcome the emperor and the prince. Wei Ji also wanted to go, but was stopped by everyone. The emperor walked in with the prince and saw that Wei Ji lifted the quilt and was about to get out of bed. He hurriedly took 2 steps forward to hold him down. "I King doesn't need to be polite, you lie down." "Wei Ji, Your Majesty, I feel really good now, I just got out of bed and walked around." The emperor looked in disbelief, clenched Wei Ji's hand and said, "Do we still need such a courtesy between our monarchs and ministers?" Wei Ji was too lazy to explain any more, turned his head to Mrs. Wei and smiled, "I want to eat the egg noodles that Mrs. made." Madame Wei hurriedly said, "I'll do it for you right now." Then bow down. Wei Ji didn't leave his children and grandchildren in the house, but said to them, "Go and help your mother." Chang Yu just glanced at the emperor, and the emperor thought about it and said, "You can go too." Chang Yu knew that what she said next was not something she could listen to, so she bowed and stepped back. Zhou Man and Xiao Yuan, who were standing on the side, looked at each other, hesitantly wondering if they were retreating. The emperor had already turned his head and looked over. "You can show Master Wei again, I think Master Wei looks much better." The two responded, stepped forward to check Wei Ji's pulse again, and then shook their heads. Wei Ji smiled and said, "Your Majesty, the minister's body knows that this disease is not a day or two, everyone is mentally prepared, and there is no need to struggle at this time." He said, "I can live to this day, I am very satisfied." "Emperor, I know that you are concerned about the new rice seeds. This is the test booklet, you can take a look." Gu Zhong immediately brought up the 6 booklets. The emperor said, "Hearing is false, seeing is believing, looking at the numbers recorded, the new rice seeds should be stabilized, you can rest assured." Wei Ji flipped through the booklet, and the emperor continued, "The Jiangnan side is over, Yang Heshu and Tang He have worked together to find out many of the officials who had been hidden away. Although the gentry and noble families in Jiangnan are still strong, you can no longer overwhelm the court, you can rest assured. Wei Ji closed the booklet and said after being silent for a while, Your Majesty, ordinary people like to depend on noble families because they depend on them, and they pay less money than the court, and the benefits are moving. On this basis, blindly fighting will only distract the heart. He said, on this point, I feel that Zhuangsun is right, and it is great to adapt to the current situation. Now that there are new rice seeds, if I make a little change, I will be more than 100 years old. Xiao Yuan was standing at the side and was confused. Zhou Man thought for a while and knew that Wei Ji was persuading the emperor not to focus on the battle with the noble family. The emperor nodded, I know, who does I king think I can use in the court? This was one of the main reasons why he brought the prince to see Wei Ji. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3204. Wei Ji was also mentally prepared, and said, Tang Minghui is self-denying and fair. The emperor thought for a while and said, the prince of Hejian County is also very smart. Wei Ji shook his head, although Li Shangshu is loyal, he is too selfish, and I'm afraid he won't be able to enter the door to save himself. Outside Tang Minghui is Zhao Qiagong, and there is also Zhang Mingde, the military envoy of Jianese Dao. Wei Ji recommended a few people, took a breath, and said, this minister has limited knowledge, so please consider carefully whether you should use it or not. Several of the talents recommended by Wei Ji before had problems. Although people's hearts are changeable and people will change over time, Wei Ji was surprised that they became so unrecognizable, so he did not dare to assure the emperor that these people would definitely be able to. Well done. The emperor asked, Tang Minghui went to Mengxia province, what about the censor's desk? It can be handed over to Lu Hui or Feng Liang. Zhou Man's eyelids twitched, and Feng Shangshu didn't matter. He was a minister of punishments anyway, but why did Lu Shangshu, a minister of households, go to the censor's desk? With his smoothness, can he do the censor's job well? The emperor nodded and said with a smile, I think so too. He nodded his finger and asked, what does Wei Qing think of Yang Heshu? Wei Ji raised his lips and said with a smile, it's even more so. The emperor also thought so, nodded, and did not discuss this topic in depth, but pointed to the prince and said, I king thinks it's better to hand this child into the hands of someone in the future. Wei Ji also looked at the crown prince and said softly, Confucius is a high-browser, and Zhuang Shaofu is peaceful and talented. There are many talented and virtuous people in the court. Your Majesty can invite His Highness to be a teacher. As a matter of habit, Wei Ji exhorted after speaking, but it was the emperor, Your Majesty must be strict with the prince, but he must not be too fond of other princes. There is a difference between the superior and the inferior, and the ambitions of the dynasties and dynasties are because of the inferiority caused. The crown prince listened with his head down, very honest, while the emperor's forehead jumped with blue veins, but thinking that Wei Ji was like this, he would not argue with him today. The two monarchs and ministers talked a lot in the end. Zhou Man and the others were sent out together with the prince. Even Gu Zhong withdrew, and the two monarchs and ministers whispered inside. Zhou Man stood under the corridor and recalled what he had just heard. He was a little excited. Brother Yang was going to be recalled to the capital after all the hard work. It's a pity, this is a secret I heard from the emperor's mouth, and it can only be rotted in the stomach. When I return to Qingzhou, I can talk to Bai Shan quietly. The prince was also thinking about the conversation just now, and when he came back to his senses, he saw Zhou Man's Hung playing with the soil under his feet in a bored manner, and he asked, I forgot to ask you, I heard that your fourth brother has come back from Qingzhou, why don't they understand that they don't come back with me? Zhou Mandao, the child is still young, it's not easy to travel far, the princess is estimated to have to live in Qingzhou for 2 years. The prince rolled his eyes unceremoniously. I think it was the two of you and your wife who deliberately left the two of them there to work for you, right? Zhou Man felt guilty and whispered, then why don't you talk to your majesty and find them an official position in Qingzhou? What official functions does Qingzhou have for Bai? The prince said, there is not even a county magistrate vacancy, so the solitary president can't let others make room for him just for him. That's not enough, anything else is fine, Zhou Man said. It's not about the official position, just let him have something to do. Prince, does he have nothing to do now? Zhou Man felt guilty for a while, and whispered, when I go back, I and Bai county magistrate propose a proposal to give the white concubine a salary. The prince waved his hand and said, I don't care about your business. I ask you, is there really any credit to Bai Erlang for the new rice planting? Zhou Man nodded again and again, of course it's true, although there are very few, but in fact my credit is not very big, the biggest ones are my eldest brother, sister-in-law and nephew, and they have been taking care of the experimental field in my Zhuangzi. The prince glanced at her, and seeing that she was still enthusiastically recommending his nephew, he asked, don't you know? Zhou Man was taken aback, what? You still have a reward for the new rice seed, but it's just that you haven't ordered it yet. After all, Wei Ji was seriously ill, and the emperor was not in the mood to reward him now. Although he was not in the mood, the prince knew the inside story. After all, the father and son discussed it. When he met the prince's gaze, Zhou Man shook his head, and the prince waved his hand, forget it, you'll know after a while. The crown prince and Wei Ji chatted for a long time in the room, and when Zhou Man and the others were about to stand still, the emperor finally loudly let people in. When Mrs. Wei received the news, she immediately put down the noodles, and came over with a bowl of noodles after a while. Wei Ji was in good spirits at this time. Although his face looked pale, he could still sit and talk to the crowd with a smile. Wei Ji took it over and said to the emperor, Your Majesty, this minister will not keep you and the prince should go back. The emperor shook his head, I smelled good, so I took him to ask you for a bowl of noodles to eat. Although the main reason for coming here today is to ask for politics, the most important thing is to bid farewell to Wei Ji. Naturally, it is impossible for the emperor to leave just like that. Wei Ji really hoped that he could leave. Although he had a lot of words in his heart, some words could only be thought about in his heart and couldn't be told. If the emperor stayed here, he was afraid before he died. I can't help but say it. He is dead, so naturally he can get over it, but he still has children and grandchildren. The emperor is grand, but sometimes he is very cautious. If his inner words really make him commit leftism, he will be counted as the head of his children and grandchildren in the future. Superior. So Wei Ji strongly advised the emperor to leave. Your Majesty can't stay outside the palace for a long time, you can come to see the minister this time, the minister is very moved. The emperor was also very moved to hold Wei Ji's hand, and then said that he would not leave. Wei Ji. He couldn't help looking at Zhou Man who was standing behind the crowd. Zhou Man met his gaze, thought about it, and said, Your Majesty, your health is good, you can't get over your sickness, you should go back to the palace. Zhou Man tugged at Xiao Yuanzhen's sleeve, Xiao Yuanzheng realized it, and immediately responded, Yes, Your Majesty, your body is just in good shape, so you need to pay attention. As soon as the crown prince heard it, he also persuaded him, My father is really worried, so let the son-in-law leave and send Lord Wei on behalf of the father. The emperor was persuaded to go out, looked back at the Wei residence, and got into the car with a sigh and left. Wei Ji was in great spirits. He not only used a bowl of noodles alone, but also had dinner with his family in the evening. Just when they thought that Wei Ji could survive until the next day, Wei Ji left quietly with a smile on the corner of his mouth. Xiao Yuan stepped forward to check his pulse, sighed and said, Master Wei has passed away. The Wei family suddenly burst into tears. Zhou Man sighed, and Xiao Yuan took a step back, bowed to Wei Ji, then stepped back, took his medicine box and left. The housekeeper of Wei House sent them out and took out 2 money bags to give to them. Zhou Man and Xiao Yuan Zheng both pushed them back. I'm here as ordered, this is my duty. My lord misunderstood, this is the carriage fee. Zhou Man shook his head, turned around and left with the medicine box in his hand. Good night. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3205. The housekeeper of Wei's house could only watch them leave. Xiao Yuan Zheng walked with her for a while and then said, Tomorrow, I will come to the door to express my condolences. Lord Zhou, there is no car to pick you up. Would you like to take the car back with me? Zhou Man handed the medicine box to Zibing and refused, It's not too far away, I'll just walk back and see you again. Xiao Yuan was looking at the road in front of him. Wei's house and Zhou's house were different. It took at least half an hour to walk there. However, when he thought that Master Wei had just left, Zhou Man and Wei Ji had always had a good relationship, so he sighed and stopped persuading him. After nodding, he turned to leave. The capital has always been prosperous, and there are many business trips, which are not affected by the season at all. Even now that the autumn harvest has just ended, when the autumn tax is paid in various places, there are still people coming and going on the streets. Although the market is separated, there have been many people coming and going in and out of Chang'an in recent years. Although there are no shops in the residence, there are people who set up stalls on both sides of the street, mostly small things and food. Generally, as long as there is no trouble, the yamen patrolling the streets will turn a blind eye and pretend not to see it. Zhou Man walked out of the Fangmen slowly and turned into Dongxi Street. The noise instantly covered her. She paused, looking at the lively scene, and walked through with her hands together. There are happy bargainers everywhere. They must not know that just now, the great Jin lost a star and the emperor lost a humorous minister. Zibing followed Zhou Man and went home silently. Everyone in Zhou's house was busy, only the olds Hutu, Qianxi and Mrs. Lu were at home. Zhou Man put down the medicine box and said to Mrs. Lu, Master Wei has passed away, we have to prepare some funeral ceremonies. Madame Lu guessed when she saw her coming back, sighed and said, I'll go with you tomorrow. Back then, when their family was able to take revenge on Zhaoxiu, it was because of Wei Ji's help, otherwise they didn't know when they would be able to meet the emperor to express their grievances. Qianxi nodded again and again, and said to Zhou Man, our family also prepares a copy, you can send it on our behalf. Zhou Mandao, let Li Zhong go with me. This time the new rice seeds are also built by Master Wei. The morning papers were delivered to each family before nightfall. Because Wei Ji died of illness, Fang City had an early curfew, and the emperor ordered the Chang'an Fang City night market to be closed for 7 days. The news came out that some merchants voluntarily hung white hemp for Wei Ji's filial piety. Zhou Dalan came back from the outside and asked, I think a lot of people have put on white hemp, should we hang some in our house too? Zhou Man, can't hang up. Mrs. Lu said, except for the empress and relatives, officials should not be filial to other officials. It's not a rule, it's common sense. If the Zhou family hangs up with white hemp, isn't it obvious that they will be friends with the Wei family? This is a taboo for officials. Zhou Mandao, that is the behavior of the people, and it is the expression of the people's love for Mr. Wei. I and Mr. Wei are officials in the same dynasty, and I can go to express my condolences. In addition to her relatives, it is only after the death of the emperor that she can keep her filial piety. If the Zhou house hangs white flags, it will not be good for the Zhou family, and it will not be good for the Wei family. The next day, Zhou Man changed into a plain dress and took Zhou Lizhong and Lu Sunyang to the Wei residence to express condolences. Wei Ji was already in the corpse, the morning hall was ready, and many officials came. Zhou Man was led into the courtyard and waited for the incense with everyone. Mr. Tang came earlier and was in the front. When he saw Zhou Man, he greeted the officials behind him and backed away to Zhou Man. "Are you here?" Zhou Man saluted, "Old Master Tang, are Lu Shangshu and the others here?" Lord Tang looked behind her, "Come here." Zhou Man turned back and saw Lu Shangshu brought Lu Huan and Zhou Liru into the door together. The two sides nodded and waited in line in silence. Zhou Man entered the room together with Old Master Tang, with Zhou Lishong and Lu Sunyang behind him. After the four had served the incense, they inserted the incense burner. The prince also arrived with the imperial edict. The emperor proposed the posthumous title Wenzhen for Wei Ji, which was the highest posthumous title among the civil servants. Few people have been able to get this posthumous title since ancient times. Before Wei Ji, there were two people who could get it, one was Kui Hong, and the other was Yu Zhao. Old Master Tang stood by and watched the Wei family receive the imperial decree. He was a little envious in his heart. He wondered if he could get a posthumous title at the beginning of the text when he died, not Wenzhen, Wenzhong, or Wengong. After the prince issued the imperial decree, he went inside to worship, and when he came out, he saw Zhou Man and Lord Tang standing together, raised his eyebrows slightly, and turned to leave. Zhou Man and Elder Tang went out together, and there were a lot of carriages parked outside the door, which stretched away, blocking the entire street, and those who came to condolences got off and walked over. Old Master Tang paused in his footsteps, and summoned a long follower, "Let's go back and let the driver go by himself." He turned to look at Zhou Man, "Master Zhou, are we going together?" Zhou Man nodded, "Old Master Tang, please." The two walked through the crowd and left, and Zhou Man asked, "When will Shuexian Tang and Shuexian Yang return to Beijing?" Old Master Tang glanced at her and said, "The court has already gone to the official documents, and it should be on the way now, and I will be in Beijing in a few days." Zhou Man nodded. Seeing that there were flowers sent by ordinary people at Fangmen, he sighed slightly and asked, "When is the next court meeting?" Lord Tang shook his head, "I don't know, maybe in the last 10 days, maybe we have to wait for Lord Wei's funeral." He stopped to look at Zhou Man. "Master Wei died of illness, and the senior officials in the family are the left ministers of the world. There is no room for vacancies. Who does Master Zhou think are competent?" Zhou Man also stopped, frowned, and thought. After a long while, he raised his eyes to look at him, looked at him silently for a long time, and saluted, "Xiaoguan will retire first." Old Master Tang smiled and watched him leave. Chang Sui, who was following behind Old Master Tang, was confused and couldn't help asking, "Master, why did Master Zhou suddenly leave?" Old Master Tang smiled slightly, "She has already replied to me, let's go back and pack some things." "Packing what?" "Some books, over-the-counter medicines, etc., and clothes, shoes and socks." Chang Sui, "Are you going to go on a business trip?" "It's not me, it's Hai He." Tang He and Yang Hesha still caught up to express their condolences to Wei Ji. After the two entered the palace, they went to the palace to report the matter. After leaving the palace, they went to the Wei residence. Yang Hesha sighed and said, "If it wasn't for the mediation of Lord Wei in the court, what I did in Jiangnan would not be so smooth, and I might not even be able to go to Jiangnan." The emperor and Wei Ji believed in him, which did not mean that other courtiers believed in him. The upward opposition was entirely blocked by Wei Ji, and the emperor suppressed him so that he could devote himself to Jiangnan. Tang He also sighed, "But it's a miracle that Lord Wei has survived until now. I heard that Zhou Man and the others have planted new rice seeds, and Lord Wei even went to see it in person. It's a good walk." Yang Hesha raised his eyebrows, "I don't know if your majesty can choose Zhou prime minister, whether we stay in the capital or continue to go out." Tang He asked, "Do you want to go out or stay in the capital?" Yang Hesha thought for a while and said, I'll go see Joe Man first, and ask about the new rice seed. If it is the same as the new wheat seed, staying in the capital will have a greater effect. Tang He nodded, you have been out for many years, you should really return to Beijing. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3206. Tang He rolled his eyes and said, I went to see Zhou Man with you. I heard that His Majesty and Lord Wei had the last meeting. Besides the prince, Zhou Man and Xiao Yuan were here. As the previous left prime minister, the emperor would definitely ask Wei Ji to recommend someone. They were good rulers and ministers, and the emperor was nostalgic, so he would definitely listen to Wei Ji's opinion. Yang Heshu looked at him helplessly. I'm afraid there are many people who have the same idea as you, and she's not stupid, so can she tell you? The Zhou family has been busy in recent days, and many guests have come to see them. There are some excuses to seek medical treatment, some to learn about new rice seeds, and some to clean up the dust for Lord Zhou. After seeing the two people seeking medical treatment, Zhou Man knew what they were planning, so he started to shut the Zhou family's door, and no one came to the door to see him. Ask for a doctor, if you have the ability to invite her through the Taiyuan hospital, or go to Ji Shitang and wait. When Wan Tian came to knock on the door, the concierge inside the door did not open the door, and said directly, my master is not feeling well, and there are no outsiders. Wan Tian said, our master is Master Zhou's senior brother Yang Heshu. When the concierge heard this, he opened the door and looked out, saw Yang Heshu and Tang He standing outside, and immediately opened both doors. It's Master Yang and Master Tang, please come in quickly, the little one will report. Zhou Man heard that and came to pick him up happily. Yang Heshu hadn't seen her for several years, and he couldn't help but said, the little girl has grown up. Zhou Man pursed his lips and smiled embarrassedly. When did senior brother return to the capital? This morning. Zhou Man poured tea for them. Have you gone to express your condolences to Lord Wei? The two nodded together. Tang He walked around in her study and asked, I heard that your Zhou family has planted a new rice seed. Actually, it's not one plant, but two plants, but the output is about the same, so everyone looked at it as one plant. Yang Heshu asked, what's the difference between the two? Zhou Man searched the bookcase and found 2 stacks of paper to show him. Ding 233 is very high and needs higher humidity, Xin 212 is much shorter, but its rice ears are also very high. Longer, more drought tolerant. And the taste, I think Xin 212 is more delicious, but my parents prefer Ding 233. Other differences still need to be studied. Now it is only grown in Longzhou, Qingzhou, Jianese Road, and Yangzhou. I don't know what the planting situation will be in other places. Tang He raised his eyebrows. Longzhou. Zhou Man nodded, that's Bai Shan's family. Tang He gave her a thumbs up, and sat on the chair with his robe lifted. I heard you guys talking about the experimental field, and 2 years ago, you said that the cultivation results were not very good. Yang Heshu had already looked down and read the data on the paper, and returned it to Zhou Man after collecting it. I want to stay in the capital. Tang He blinked. Hubu. Yang Heshu nodded. Only in the Ministry of Households can new varieties of rice be better promoted. It took a long time before new varieties of wheat were popularized, and there are still many places that have never tried new varieties of wheat. Tang He frowned. The Ministry of Household, is there any vacancy? 1 radish and 1 pit, they can't conjure a pit out of thin air. Zhou Man thought for a while, and said after a while, it's not impossible. Yang Heshu and Tang He turned to look at her. Zhou Mangkong spread their hands. I can't tell you, I'm an imperial physician, and keeping your mouth shut is a basic quality. Yang Heshu couldn't help laughing and said to her, thank you. Tang He looked at her helplessly. What's the difference between what you said and everything you said? Well, there is still a difference. For example, who is the next left minister? Zhou Man ignored him. How did she know who it was? However, there is a high chance that the old Tang will take over. She felt that if she were the emperor, she would follow the advice of Lord Wei and choose Lord Tang, but in this way. Zhou Man looked at Tang He with a look of sympathy. Tang He met her gaze, shivered, and leaned back. Why are you looking at me like this? Zhou Man said, go back, you just entered the capital today, you are entering the palace again, and you are going to mourn again. You must be tired. Yang Heshu was not polite to her either, got up and said, then let's say goodbye first. Tang He was still confused until he walked out of Zhou's house. Why do you think Zhou Mungung is looking at me like that? Do not know. Take a guess. Tang He really couldn't think of it. Help me think about it with your ingenuity. Yang Heshu thought about it for him. Perhaps I saw you described as thin, so I pity you. Tang He looked suspicious. Aren't you losing weight? Why doesn't she look at you like that? Tang He quickly knew why. Wei Zilin left a message before he left, not wanting the Wei family to hold a large funeral, but there were many people who came to express condolences, and the emperor asked the Ministry of Rites to help, so the momentum was even greater. But the Wei family still insisted that they only stay alive for 7 days, and then they went to the funeral. After Wei Ji was buried, the emperor ordered a great court meeting. Zhou Man put on his official uniform early in the morning and led Zhou Lizhong, who was going to court for the first time, behind Mr. Zhuang into the palace. When he arrived at the Taiji Hall, Zhou Man pointed to a position by the door and said, your position, wake up, listen more and talk less, we are not important ministers, we only need to go to the great court meeting, or come to gain knowledge, and rarely call us. Anyway, she has been in the great court for many years, and the number of times she has been asked at the great court is very small, and she can count it with her hands and feet. Zhou Li responded heavily. Mr. Zhuang had already sat down in his seat. Zhou Man glanced at it and breathed a sigh of relief. She was a little far away, and she was still in the back, so happy. Zhou Man heaved a sigh of relief and sat down in his seat when he saw Tang He and the magistrate Guo. Zhou Man directly skipped Tang He, whom he had only seen the day before, and looked at the magistrate Guo. Master Guo, it's been a long time. The magistrate Guo smiled and nodded. Yes, it's been a long time since I haven't seen Lord Zhou. Everyone stood and chatted for a while, and the emperor came outside. The officials immediately stood up, knelt down and bowed after the emperor stood still. The emperor let the officials sit down and sighed. Wei Qing has passed away, and the province needs someone to take over. Can you recommend someone? Begwan was silent. They wanted to recommend themselves, but would they dare? Zhou Man sat with his head lowered and listened to the silence in the hall. It took a long time for the emperor to say, Wei Qing has recommended a few people for me. He said, I thought about it for a long time, and in the end I prefer Tang Iking. What do you all think? Of course, some people have opinions. The emperor made a head, and someone immediately came out, Your Majesty, this minister has a recommendation. Tang He, who was sitting in front of Zhou Man's right, was struck by lightning, and he turned his head stiffly to look at Zhou Man. Zhou Man glanced up and saw that the emperor hadn't noticed this. He breathed a sigh of relief, stretched out his hand and pushed his head back, and said in a low voice, Look ahead. The first sentence that came out of Tang He's heart was that his father was going to be the left minister. Then he is the son of the left minister, but he is past the age of a dandy. In the end, I remembered that his father was the prime minister of the left, he was an official in the same dynasty, and the official position was not low. What should he do if he made a great contribution? Tang He's heart burst into tears, and he finally knew why Zhou Man looked at him with sympathy the day before yesterday. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3207. The emperor spent half the time of the great court meeting to determine the candidate for the left minister, and the old Tang master was transferred from the censor's desk to Mengxia province. Feng Shangshu of the punishment department was transferred to the censor desk to take over, but it was not the left and right servants who took over the punishment department, but Zhang Shide, the military governor of Jianese Road, the left servant of the punishment department, and the right servant was promoted to the left servant. Tang He was appointed as the right servant of the punishment department. On behalf of the emperor, he inspected the prefectures and counties of the world, and reviewed the case for the Ministry of Justice. Other departments have also changed, and the post of Zhoushilang of the Ministry of Household has been vacant, and Yang Heshu has taken over. After the transfer of official positions, the emperor began to point out the matter of the new rice seed. Zhou Lizhong had already been named Konglai Upin Sinong Temple Prime Minister, but the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty were not fools, and the main credit for the new rice seed was Zhou Man, Bai Shan, and others. However, the new rice seeds were planted in Zhou Man's work field, and all the people who were instructed to do things were Zhou's family. I heard that she has always liked flowers and plants, and she would always bring a hoe when she went out for an outing, as long as she had never seen one before. She has to dig home to study. So most of the new rice seeds were cultivated by her. The emperor also thought so, so he directly skipped Bai Shan and others and awarded Zhou Man. In the Chongguan Museum, the compilation of the 4th grade has come to an end, and then it is the museum affairs, which is the position of Confucius Jiju. The emperor didn't want to give Zhou Man another ministerial title, so he directly conferred the title of honorary title, from the county head to the county head, and the fief was still in Liang. As for Bai Shan, Bai Erlang, and Yin or the three mentioned in Zhou Man's Zi, the emperor gave them gold and silver rewards. There are too few official positions, and the 4 of them, except Zhou Man and Bai Shan, who are still diligent, the other 2 are people who are not so much. This time, the meeting was very long, from the morning until the afternoon, and the waiter brought the working meal at noon. This is the second time Zhou Man has had lunch intermittently at the DPRK meeting, and it is as bad as ever. While everyone was eating attentively, Tang He turned to face Zhou Man. Zhou Man held his own rice plate, thought about it, picked a piece of meat that was not bad and put it on his rice plate, comforting, Tang Shuexiang, don't be sad, there's nothing wrong with inspecting the world, you isn't your ideal to want no unjust cases in the world. This official position is in your favor, and you can take this opportunity to visit friends all over the world, and come to see us when you go to Qingzhou. Tang He said, look at my face, and I won't say anything about being black. How many tails of meat do you have? He said, I don't mind going on tour, but, I'm not so eager to go on tour. At least let me take care of my body. My stalwart and handsome are all gone. The county magistrate on the side put down his chopsticks and looked up at him, Master Tang, I want to eat, don't hurt me. Tang He, what did I hurt you? It made me laugh and spoil the food. The county magistrate Guo pointed at Yang Heshu who was sitting not far away and said, you said handsome in front of him. Tang He emphasized, I'm talking about stalwart. Yang Heshu said, you are tired, so you are on a tour. As long as you pay more attention to rest, the meat will be back soon. Zhou Man thought about it seriously and said, can I make a prescription for you? Tang He's heart tightened, didn't you say that the medicine is 3-point poisonous? Could it be that my current health is serious enough to take medicine? Zhou Man, medicine recipe, I didn't let you take medicine. Tang He, isn't it still medicine? Zhou Man, did you know that mutton, chicken, and fish are also medicines in the eyes of doctors? Tang He immediately closed his mouth, seeing Zhou Man lowered his head to eat without speaking for a long time, he hinted, I think it is best to use fish as medicine. Yang Heshu couldn't help laughing out loud, shook his head and said to Zhou Man, Mrs. Tang doesn't like fishy smell, so his family rarely eats fish, but he likes to eat fish. You can give him a medicinal recipe, there are with your recipe, he can eat whatever he wants at home. Joe Man nodded and said, no problem, just wait, I'll give you a recipe later. She turned her head and asked Yang Heshu, brother Yang, do you want it? Yang Heshu shook his head, I don't need this. Kui she loves and respects him very much. As long as he is at home, there will always be a few dishes that he likes to eat on the table, and they can be exchanged for the ones that are not repeated. Yang Heshu reminded Tang He, Zhang Shangshu is going to hand over the affairs of Yizhu, and he has to go to Beijing. I'm afraid you can't wait, so before Feng Shangshu leaves office, you can ask about the inspection in a while. Tang He sighed, Your Majesty can't let me go out of Beijing right away. County Magistrate Guo said, it's not that, this time, there are changes in various departments. Even the Imperial Physician's office has moved 2 officials. The affairs are complicated and can't be sorted out in an instant. It should be able to stay with you for a while. Joe Mandeo, find an opportunity to ask your Majesty in person to see when he wants you to leave Beijing. Tang He, would you help me ask? After thinking about it, Joe Man felt that it was not a big deal, so he nodded. Tang He was choked, and after a long while he said, are you really going to ask? Yang Heshu said to her, don't go, there's old Master Tang, it's not our turn for this kind of thing. Tang He nodded, I was very smart 2 days ago. Others didn't answer any questions, but now I'm taking care of things. Zhou Monsi really didn't think this was a problem. The emperor was both distressed and sad during this time. In addition, he was ill some time ago, so his body felt very tired and not very good recently. Zhou Man and Xiao Yuan are taking turns conditioning the emperor's body, especially since she has been acupuncture for a long time. The monarch and ministers have a lot of gossip to talk about. She thinks Tang He's question is very gossip, and she can ask the emperor when she is acupuncture. However, both Yang Xuexiang and Tang Xuexiang said so, and she suppressed this matter. She looked up and saw that the emperor had put down his chopsticks to drink tea, and immediately buried himself in the rice. Hurry up, your Majesty is finished. When the other 3 heard it, they hurried back to their seats and tried to eat. The emperor glanced down and found that there were still many people eating, so he picked up the chopsticks and empty plates again, and watched the ministers below eat. He used to be on the march to fight, and he was used to eating faster, and this meal wasn't very tasty, so he had to eat faster. The emperor held the empty plate for half an hour. Seeing that most of the people had finished eating, the rest was almost the same, so he put down his chopsticks and plate. When the officials saw this, they put them down one after another, and put the bowls and chopsticks in the food box and put them beside them. The waiter filed in and took the food boxes one by one. The emperor asked, the autumn harvest has ended in various places, and the next step is the autumn tax. This year, due to the problem of the salt field in the south of the Yangtze River, there was a flood in the Jingzhou area. A lot of money and grain have been allocated for the dredging of the Yellow River. Now the treasury is empty. The great court continued until the end of Shenxi, and when Zhou Lizhong got up from his position, his waist was almost unable to straighten. Zhou Man walked up to him, looked up and down, and then reached out and patted a few acupoints on his lower back and back. Zhou Lizhong felt that he was breathing, and he lowered his voice, little ant, this guy is more hot than me. It's going to be hard work going down. Good night. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 3208. The emperor recruited Zhuman to return to Beijing, firstly because of Lord Wei's illness, and secondly because of the new rice seed. He also knew that the Zhou family was in charge of Zhou Man. If it was just a reward, it would be the same as an imperial decree to send her to Qingzhou. The reason why he called her back was to discuss the cultivation of rice seeds and the purchase of rice seeds with the Ministry of Housing and Sinong Temple. The great court meeting had just ended, and Zhou Manzheng was thinking of going out of the palace to go home and rest for a while, but Gu Zhong stopped him before he left the palace gate. He bent down and smiled, "Master Zhou, your majesty wants to see you." However, he hadn't left yet, but waited for a while. After Yang Heshe came out, he said to him, "Master Yang, your majesty has summoned him." The two looked at each other, nodded with Tang He who came out together, and went to the apse with Gu Zhong. The emperor sat for almost a day. Although he took a rest and went to the toilet, he was still very tired. He was walking around with his neck turned. When he turned his head and saw the prince sitting steadily on the chair, he pointed at him. Said, "You also move." "Prince, father, the sons and ministers are not tired." The emperor didn't believe it, and was about to tell him when Yang Heshu and Zhou Man arrived. The emperor asked people to come in and greeted the two of them to sit down. "I didn't have a good lunch. I asked people to prepare some meals and refreshments. Let's talk while we eat." Zhou Man and Yang Heshu bowed and sat down opposite the prince. Both Zhou Man and Yang Heshu had experience eating at the same table with the emperor, so they weren't nervous, just a little cautious. The emperor was also tired today and didn't want to greet him, so he said directly, "I have seen the recorded data. The 2 rice seeds that can be used now are only available in a few of your households. I will let the Ministry of Household and you to buy seeds. This matter is up to the director. Bo is in charge. Zikian, as you know, the treasury has spent a lot this year, and now there is not much silver in the treasury." Zhou Man was stunned for a moment before realizing that the words were addressed to him. The emperor rarely called her own words. She was not used to it. She shivered and said hurriedly, "Don't say that, your majesty. I can make it cheaper at the regular price, so I can share the worries for your majesty." Yang Heshu, who was sitting beside him, cleared his throat, attracted Zhou Man's attention, and asked, "Is this the normal price of seeds, or the normal price of grain?" The emperor also squinted and smiled at Zhou Man. "Zhou Man, what do you think, your majesty?" The emperor turned to look at the prince. "What does the prince think?" "Prince." Yang Heshu's feet moved slightly, and he stepped on Zhou Man's toes with a little force, and Zhou Man said with a smile, "Of course it's based on the regular price of food. Your majesty's kindness, the minister's family can't repay it." The emperor smiled and said, "I can't let you suffer too much, just charge it at the regular price. It doesn't have to be cheap, lest the Ministry of Household bully you in the future." "Yang Heshu, isn't the Ministry of Household still your Ministry of Household?" Zhou Man gave up the big head, and Zhou Man didn't care about the small head, so he declined, insisting that this was what she should do, and she did it voluntarily. The emperor was happy, so he pointed to a fish soup and asked Gu Zhong to give her 2 spoons, and said with a smile, "This fish soup is delicious." Zhou Man took a bite, exhaled secretly, raised his head and smiled at the emperor. "It's delicious, your majesty. This minister also has something to report." "What's up?" Zhou Man put down his spoon and said, "The Qingzhou Medical Office has opened 3 now, but the people in Qingzhou still cannot enjoy the benefits of the medical office, let alone other local medical offices. There are a lot of doctors needed by the medical offices in various places. Besides, there are also officials who are required by the medical offices for management and chores, which are all in short supply." Zhou Man said, "I would like to ask your majesty to expand the enrollment scope of the Imperial Medical Office, or in the Imperial College examination. 1 more item is added, and when the time comes, the supervision and administration will cooperate and cultivate some talents for the Imperial Medical Office. This matter is not trivial, although it is trivial, but it has far-reaching effects." The emperor also put down his chopsticks, and the handkerchief wiped his mouth and asked, "Is there any more?" Zhou Man smiled and said, "There is also the matter of the restructuring of the state and county medical offices. The minister has previously stated this matter." The emperor looked at the prince, I remember that you endorsed this earlier, can you all agree? The prince said calmly, many people agree with this. The emperor squinted at the prince, what about those who disagree? The prince said, Father, the students of the Imperial Physician Department are now playing a very important role in the army. In addition, the medicines produced by the Imperial Physician Department are not yet profitable, but they can cover a lot of expenses. Urchin thinks this is a good move. Zhou Man nodded again and persuaded the emperor, Your Majesty, don't think that the medical department is operating at a loss now. After a long time, it will definitely make money. Even if it doesn't make money, it won't be as bad as it is now. And think about how many ordinary people the medical department can save. The money lost is also used for your people, and they are all your children. The emperor was drinking soup when he choked directly. The prince glared at Zhou Man secretly, and together with Guzhong, served his father and wiped the front of his clothes. The emperor ordered Zhou Man from afar, and was very happy, but after a brief pause, he said, I heard that the Bai family has also planted many new rice seeds in Longzhou, and the harvest is not bad at all compared to Qingzhou and Mianzhou. Zhou Man was silent for a while, and finally gritted his teeth and said, Okay, I'll give you the regular price. The emperor emphasized, it is the regular price to the Ministry of Household. Zhou Man nodded perfunctorily, isn't it all the same? The host and guests enjoyed this meal, at least on the surface. The emperor waited for Yang and Shu's Human to walk away, and sighed with the prince, if only those old foxes in the court were as cheerful as Zhou Man. The crown prince slandered, if there is something, Ziqian is full of everything. But he still nodded and praised, she is young and doesn't take selfish interests very seriously. And Zhou Man, who was walking outside the palace with Yang Heshu, was doing mental arithmetic with his fingers pinched. Yang Heshu looked at her several times and couldn't help but ask, what are you? Zhou Man, I will calculate how many years it will take for me to plant the newly acquired fief of the county lord before I can get back the money I gave up today. Yang Heshu couldn't help but smile when he heard it, then you must have earned it, it's not an honor, it's just the value of the fief, it will take a few years to earn it back, and the fief is for a lifetime, you work hard to live to be 80 years old, then there are still nearly 60 years, if the emperor's grace is mighty, when your title can be attacked, and you can leave some for future generations, it will be even more profitable. When Zhou Man heard this, his heart suddenly stopped hurting, and he nodded again and again, good idea. Yang Heshu laughed out loud and asked, are you happier thinking about it this way? Zhou Man nodded, seeing him smiling like this, he couldn't help but say, Brother Yang, you just followed your majesty to pit me. Yang Heshu said, I am now a member of the Ministry of Housing, I am a buyer, and you are a seller. Naturally, I want to maximize the interests of the Ministry of Households. Zhou Menyu thought about it too, and skipped the matter, brother, my price is already very low, then your household department can't press my money. Yang Heshu smiled and said, don't worry, I will give it to you on time. Zhou Man was relieved.